Can you explain the New Tipperary, the idea behind that?
The New Tipperary was an extraordinary story, I suppose. Just yeah. Just in my note here, it's the most important historical event to happen in Tipperary town prior to the War of Independence was the plan of campaign and the building of New Tipperary in the late 1880s, the early 90s. Now, the plan was a national coordinated programme to fight for fair rents based on tenant solidarity. So the idea was that if a landlord here put up the rents, tenants all round would oppose it and refuse to pay the rent. They'd pay the rent, the existing rent, but they wouldn't pay the increased rent. And that was a national campaign, very much led by John Dillon, the son of John Blake Dillon, the famous Landleaguer, and William O'Brien. Now, one of the estates that they targeted, the plan targeted nationally, was the Ponsonby estate near Youghal, which refused to accede to their demands for rent reductions. So Ponsonby's put up their rents. They refused to accede to demands for reductions, so the plan boycotted them. And the landlords formed a landlords syndicate to resist the plan. And Arthur Hugh Smith Barry, who was the landlord of Tipperary town, a neighbour of the Ponsonbys, became chairman of the landlords group. Being the landlord of the main part of Tipperary town, the plan decided to pressurise Smith Barry by withholding rents in the town. This set off a series of events in Tipperary that led to public agitation, there was a lot of it, and evictions. The Daltons, now that I talked about, that all had the place in, they were kind of pretty big landlords in Tipperary town, middle landlords. They owned a lot of property in Tipperary town, the Daltons. And they were Michael O'B. Dalton, and where my grandfather married into, they were evicted out of there during the plan. They weren't that long evicted, but they were evicted for a while, and the neighbours along that road where I grew up. The local group, led by Father Dave Humphreys and Michael O'Brien Dalton, Michael O'B. Dalton, who was Louis Dalton's brother, they pioneered the building of New Tipperary. What they did was they withheld the rents in Tipperary town, moved out to another estate, the Stafford O'Brien estate, just to the west of the town, and built a new town there. It's still there, Dillon Street, and it's the New Tipperary is still there. That was a whole piece of history of Tipperary itself. They built a butter market there, now that's gone, but New Tipperary still exists. And if you drive out from Tipperary towards Limerick Junction, as you come out of the town on the left-hand side and the right, that's New Tipperary. What I don't know is why the Stafford O'Brien estate allowed them to do it, but they did anyway, and they built New Tipperary. Now they say that the plan was kind of broke by it, that they spent almost too much of their money, and then of course local things went wrong. Apparently Father Dave was an impossible man and was very extreme in his views, and the whole thing, I suppose, when you think of it, you build a New Tipperary, then you had to govern the thing and manage it. And Cleeve's Creamery had a big creamery business in Tipperary town, and in the kind of around the 1910s, 11s, there was a lot of labour agitation in Tipperary town for higher wages. And interestingly enough, Louis Dalton was chairman of the employers, the bosses. And some of the guys who became really prominent in the 4th Battalion were people on the Labour side. And indeed Michael O'Callaghan, who actually, when you say the first shots that were fired in the War of Independence were in Salahead Beg, it's not quite true. Before that, Michael O'Callaghan, I think it was 1916 actually, Tipperary Town, who was working in one of the factories and was active in the labour movement in Tipperary. His house was surrounded by local agitators. I'm not quite sure why, but he had a gun. He got out of town, and he was up in actually in another Hogan house, which was Hennessy's of 1 hour, and he actually shot 2 or 1 RIC man who came to the house looking for him, shot him dead, and escaped to America, and came back years after, and became the court clerk in Tipperary Town. And his family used to went to school with a son of his, Michael O'Callaghan. Yeah, but the interesting thing is that while you had the Sinn Féin thing and you had the nationalist thing, you also had the local agitation, you had the local wages, and all the interests didn't all coincide. As I say, Louis Dalton was very much on the property owners and the business owners side, and a lot of the guys who were the draper's assistants and the others were on the labour side, so that's a whole thing that's maybe not explored at all yet, how all that worked.